That afternoon had started like any other boring weekend where I had nothing planned, so I decided to kill time wandering through a discount strip mall that always looked like it was one rent payment away from going under. My Volvo wasn't anything special, just the kind of car you drove when you didn't want anyone noticing you. And I parked a few rows back, letting the engine tick quiet while I lit a cigarette and rolled the window down. Two women in their 20s zipped into the lot ahead of me in a cherry red sports car, the kind of vehicle that screams for attention whether you want it or not. They hopped out laughing, their energy filling the place like background music. I was watching them in that casual, people-watching way when movement from another lane caught my attention. A blue hatchback had pulled in almost at the same time I did, and out stepped a man who immediately gave off the vibe of someone trying way too hard to seem normal. He called after the women in this overly friendly tone. "Excuse me, girls." And when they didn't bite, he followed it with another attempt. This time he added a line about maybe bumping their car when he pulled in and needing to exchange insurance information. The excuse was flimsy because I'd seen both cars arrive, and they hadn't even been near each other. I sat there smirking to myself at how transparent the attempt was, thinking no one would ever fall for something that weak. One of the girls, though, hesitated just enough to make my stomach tighten. Something about her slowing down and glancing back made me flick my cigarette and climb out of my car. I strode toward them without thinking, waving like I was late to meet friends. "Hey, you guys made it," I called out. The look the girls gave me was half confused until I gave the smallest side-eye in the man's direction. Instantly they got it. One of them even plastered on a fake smile and said, "Oh, hey Doris," in a way that almost made me laugh despite the tension. The man shifted closer, standing uncomfortably at my side, and repeated his story. "I'm really sorry to bother you ladies, but I think I might have dinged your car pulling in." His voice was syrupy, and his eyes never settled. They flicked around the lot like he was sizing everything up. I cut him off before the girls could respond. "Nope, you didn't. I was sitting here when you parked, and your car wasn't anywhere near theirs." My tone was friendly enough, but the words were sharp, final. He frowned, just a slight crease in his forehead, and then backed off with a muttered apology before turning on his heel. We didn't wait around. The three of us ducked into the store together, letting the automatic doors close us into the buzzing safety of fluorescent lights. Inside, we huddled for a moment. That nervous laughter people get when adrenaline spikes, but nothing terrible has actually happened. "Doris? Really?" I teased, and the girl grinned. "That's my grandma's name." The laugh eased us, but the relief didn't last long. The manager barely cared when we told him what had happened, brushing it off like it wasn't his problem. One of the women called the non-emergency police line, just to make sure there was some record. They promised to send a patrol, though none of us looked convinced. I eventually split off from them and headed toward the craft store at the other end of the lot. As I walked, my eyes slid toward the blue car, still parked in the exact same spot. He hadn't left. Worse, I noticed the subtle angle of his rearview mirror, pointed just enough that he could watch me. My skin prickled, and I changed my plan, choosing to move my Volvo closer to the store rather than leave it sitting far back across the lot. I pulled up between two big pickups, hoping to box myself in with a little cover. Inside, I shopped as calmly as I could manage, but couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. That's when I picked up a pack of X-Acto blades at the register. Not because I really needed them, but because having something sharp in my pocket made me feel less helpless. The clerk didn't even blink when I quietly told her about the guy in the blue car and asked if she could watch me from the window as I walked back out. She said he'd been hanging around all day, that other customers had mentioned him, and yet the police still hadn't shown up. That made my nerves buzz harder. When I finally walked outside, there he was, parked directly across from my car now, having moved to face me head on. He'd gone out of his way to back into the spot so he had a perfect line of sight. I muttered under my breath and opened my car door wide, creating a barrier between me and him. The car door opened and he stepped out slowly, like he was testing the air. He walked around to the front of his car, stopped, and tilted his head. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" he asked. I couldn't help myself. Sarcasm is my armor. So I smirked and said, "Yeah, from the parking lot half an hour ago." He didn't react, his face blank, almost hollow. Then he tried again, insisting he knew me from somewhere else, and his demeanor shifted entirely. Gone was the awkward, overeager act. Now he was flat, emotionless, like a machine trying to wear human skin. My stomach lurched, but I stayed rooted, wedging my keys between my knuckles just in case. He began talking about how lonely he was, how he was passing through town, how he'd love company, maybe at a bar down the street. His pitch was monotone, rehearsed, and it chilled me because there was no warmth behind it, no real personality, just a hollow attempt at luring me. When he added a forced compliment about my looks, I cut him off with a laugh and tossed out, "What, no puppy in the back of your car to sweeten the deal?" The words hung in the air, and for once, he looked thrown. He glanced at his car like he was checking if something was supposed to be there, then back at me, confused. When he stepped closer, I reached into my bag, pulled the X-Acto pack just enough to flash it, and with the craziest grin I could muster, said something like, "Want to see my new blades and a hockey mask I picked up?" That did it. He froze, muttered an excuse about being mistaken, and retreated. I slammed my car door shut, locked it, and scribbled down his license plate with shaking hands. Moments later, a cop car circled into the lot, lights off. Classic timing. The officer listened carefully when I gave every detail I could, even sketching out what the guy looked like. Middle-aged, sloppy comb-over, stained shirt, work boots, glasses. The cop praised my quick thinking, but also gave me a gentle lecture about not letting myself get cornered like that again. Fair enough. That night I went for a couple of stiff drinks to calm down, and later at home I caught a glimpse of a police sketch on TV. It looked disturbingly similar to the man from the lot. Could have been coincidence, sure, but I'm not convinced. My hometown was the sort of place where kids played until the streetlights came on, and everyone knew everyone's business, which made the one creepy thing that happened to me at 16 stand out like a bruise against an otherwise easy childhood. I had just earned my driver's license, and the freedom made spontaneous detours irresistible. So after a soccer game, I swung by the mall to kill time, wander aimlessly through aisles of fluorescent cheap goods, and pretend I wasn't worried about the pile of homework waiting at home. By the time I left the store, the sky had gone dark, and most people had already filtered out, leaving the parking lot with that soft, hollow quiet that makes every small sound feel amplified, and every shadow seem full of intent. I took my time walking to the car because walking alone felt normal then, and I was still convinced that the world was mostly benign. I was not looking for trouble, and I did not want to look paranoid, which is why it took me a beat too long to notice the car that had quietly fallen into step behind me, and then matched my pace, as if it had no other destination. At first, I told myself 1,000 reasonable things about why a car would be following so slowly through an empty lot. But when it stopped passing empty spaces and simply sat one lane behind me matching my speed, some small alarm in my chest clicked on, and I started to rehearse the tiniest, most practical measures in my head. My keys moved from pocket to finger until my hand made a fist around them, so if I had to strike, something hard would be there between my knuckles, and I kept my steps steady while calculating how to make unlocking the car look casual, and if necessary, sudden enough to avoid giving my position away. The plan in my head was embarrassingly basic and probably cowardly, but it was practical. Do not show panic. Reach the car, get inside, lock the doors, and drive away before the other person had any opportunity to intercept. When I finally reached the driver's side door and hit the unlock button, the lights flashed and betrayed me the instant they winked on, which is when the black sedan lunged into the empty space directly beside my car, like it had been sitting there waiting to pounce, and for the first time my pulse jumped into my throat. The passenger door of that car swung open before I could get my seatbelt clicked, and a hand aimed straight for my side as if to wrench the door open more fully, or to grab the handle and pull me out. An instinct took over in a way that made every training video about how to respond in danger seem quaint and slow. I shoved myself across the seat, slammed the door, locked it with both hands, and threw the ignition into life in one furious motion, tires squealing as if that sound could erase the memory of a stranger's reach. Even now, years later, I can replay that 3-minute stretch of parking lot darkness and seat foam like a short film. The way the lot seemed suddenly very small, how the glow of the mall's exit signs felt both comforting and ridiculous, how my own breath sounded unnecessarily loud, and how the act of driving away so fast felt not like triumph, but like a lucky pivot from a situation that had the potential to go very wrong. Life has taken me into bigger cities and more complicated nights after that, and I have learned rules about situational awareness and a handful of habits that keep me safer. But none of those lessons erased the raw, wordless urgency of that instant when the car beside mine moved and a hand reached for me. The whole episode sits in my memory as a tiny, important proof that sometimes ordinary nights can hide real risk, and that small preparations can become the difference between a story you tell and a story that changes everything. We were all worn thin by the term schedule in a week of rain when the weirdest little thing happened at my flat, which sits above the student parking lot and looks straight down on the cars like a cheap balcony theater. So when something unusual appeared, it was impossible not to notice. It was late winter, nights that close up early and stay frigid, and I'd invited a few people over for dinner and a binge of American Horror Story Season 7, which was the perfect low-effort bonding plan, because everyone could eat and complain about the same episode at once. The window in my living room faces the lot, and at about 6 in the evening, a car eased into one of the far spots and left its headlights on. At first, nobody thought much of it, the obvious explanation being that the driver simply forgot, so we carried on with food and spoilers. People peeled off to go home one by one, until only one friend lingered. Then she left too, and the glow from that lone car's beams kept pulsing on the asphalt like a stubborn lighthouse, which started to nag at us as the hours ticked toward 1 in the morning. My friend stepped outside to leave, and called me a few minutes later in a whisper that sounded like she was trying to breathe through the phone without waking the building, saying that a girl sat in the front seat of that parked car with her eyes wide open and unmoving, which made my stomach drop because this particular friend is not given to dramatic inventions. I told her to come back and we would check it out together, but she refused and hung up fast, adamant that she would not pass that spot again. So I grabbed my phone flashlight and went downstairs, the phone pressed to my ear while she watched the reflection of the lot in my window. Between the parking area and the building, there is a new construction zone with a giant open garage used for deliveries during the day, an echoing maw at night that seemed to call for trouble when paired with a lone car and a still figure inside. Approaching the car, the headlights made everything around me look washed and distorted, and for a second I couldn't actually see the face in the driver's seat, because the beam was right in my eyes. Then, as if it had been timed to the exact moment of my arrival, the car rolled forward, pivoted with a smooth, practiced motion, and backed into that pitch-black garage where the lights clicked off and swallowed it. There was no rush of panic, no stumbling figure ejecting from the vehicle, only the neat, controlled maneuver of a driver who knew exactly where she meant to go, which made the whole thing feel less like an accident and more like a decision performed in plain sight. I hesitated at the garage mouth for only a breath, because the friend on the phone was telling me in frantic whispers to go back upstairs. So I left and tried to reason it out in the small space of our living room while we peered through the blinds. We debated calling the police, then shrugged it off for reasons that felt both lazy and practical at the same time. There were no overt threats, no violence witnessed, only an odd tableau that might have a harmless explanation. So instead we settled in with the heater on and watched the spot through the slats. Sometime after 3 in the morning, the same car slid back into the identical place it had been before, headlights low this time as the driver eased in like someone repeating a carefully planned routine. And when the sun came up, it was gone, leaving behind nothing but a slightly chilled patch of asphalt and our imaginations to fill in the blanks. Even after weeks of replaying the scene and trading theories about surveillance, sleepwalking, or stalking, The facts that stuck with me were stubborn in their strangeness. A car sitting with headlights on for hours. A motionless person seeming to watch something or someone. A deliberate retreat into a dark construction garage. And an eventual return at a time when most people were either asleep or heading to early classes. The explanation that made the most sense to my pragmatism was that the woman had been waiting as part of something intentional, perhaps watching a house until a pattern emerged, or sitting in a way that let her see without being easily noticed. Yet the choice to leave headlights burning for 7 hours contradicts any notion of subtlety and complicates the whole story into a tiny, unsolved puzzle. Working retail teaches you to notice small patterns, like who always parks in the same spot, and which regulars prefer the bench by the entrance. And that habit is what saved me from letting a weird encounter slide into something worse. I was 20, juggling full-time college and a summer graveyard of bagging shifts. And that afternoon, I had the cart run, which means corralling rows of carts from the parking lot into the vestibule, while customers weave around like they own the place. The lot has a little island with benches where people rest, and while I was carrying a stack of 5 carts across it, a man sitting on the bench called out about my hair, which started as a compliment, but very quickly moved into a steady stream of intrusive questions about where I lived, how long I worked there, and whether I liked the job. He spoke slow and fixed, not like someone making idle conversation, and because I had carts to bring inside, I kept my answers clipped and walked on, but the tone lingered in my head like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. Inside the store, I kept an eye on the bench, because it looked like he was still watching, and as the 5 o'clock rush swelled, I tried to focus on loading produce and smiling for customers, while the man stayed planted there like he belonged to the asphalt. That behavior would have been irritating if it hadn't been unsettling, since he hadn't purchased anything and hadn't talked to anyone else, which made me ask a silent question about motives, and then immediately drop it, because the line needed baggers. After about an hour of stealing glances out the window and seeing him still in the same place, I boxed the thought into the practical folder and asked Robert, one of the heavier cart guys who looks like a linebacker and moves with a soft patience, to cover my section for a while, because I wasn't comfortable being the only one heading out. He agreed without drama and went about his work, which made me breathe a little easier and let me finish the shift without having to babysit my own anxiety. Not long after I handed Robert the last cart, he waved me over and said the guy had left, which felt like an invitation to remove the worry from my shoulders. But that relief lasted only until I stepped back outside to collect the corrals, and the man walked confidently out from behind a parked car. The way he moved had friction to it, small, unpredictable motions that read as irritation rather than casual curiosity, and he immediately started accusing me of staring at him when the exact opposite had been true the whole night. He got very close while I was still backed against the third corral, and the parking lot had emptied enough that it felt like a private stage for his anger. Backing away felt instinctive and useless at the same time, so I used the minimal language I could manage to diffuse him, while mentally counting escape routes, knowing I could run, but also knowing that running across asphalt with a stack of carts and customers' groceries would look reckless and not help the situation. The scene changed in a way that saved me from having to decide whether to bolt, because a woman walking toward the store noticed the tension and stepped into it, asking in a loud, simple voice what the problem was, which shifted the balance from 2 people in confrontation to 3 witnesses in daylight. He had that moment of recalculation that bullies get when they realize the scoreboard has tilted against them, and he turned on his heel and walked off toward the hardware store next door, like the whole episode had been a bad skip in his playlist. The woman walked me inside, asked my manager to keep a watch, and stayed long enough for me to report the incident, which was the right move since the manager told me to call immediately if the man returned and that she would handle it. He never came back. Sitting on a stool behind a register later that night, I replayed the interaction with my coworkers and felt the odd mix of relief and gratitude that comes when a stranger decides to act rather than look away. The fact that the woman intervened matters in a concrete way because she prevented that moment from escalating and gave me a chance to do the sensible things the manager suggested. note physical details, tell a supervisor, and avoid being alone in the parking lot until it felt safe. I don't know what his intentions were beyond irritation and invasion, but I know I'll always be the kind of person who accepts help when it appears, and I'll step in if I ever see someone else shrinking away in the parking lot. Living in a town north of Sheffield has a kind of grim, endless gray that hangs over everything, like the color was drained out of life and left a permanent haze of drizzle and fog. The streets are unpredictable, full of people on the edge, some clearly addicted to something, others just shouting at themselves or getting into fights, and it's the kind of place where you constantly have to keep your eyes open or risk stepping into trouble without even noticing it. One late December night, my friends and I were cruising around, and we ended up at the empty parking lot of our local shopping outlets so they could test drive my car. So we parked at the far end and killed the engine, which also turned off the lights. Just as we were settling in, we noticed another car rolling slowly into the middle of the lot. At first we ignored it, thinking it was a random driver, but the moment I turned my lights back on, the car shot toward us, stopping just a few feet from mine, headlights blazing, like it had been waiting for exactly that moment. We sat there frozen for a second, unsure what was happening, until the other car slowly reversed toward a lamppost. A tall, skinny man climbed out, locking eyes with me for a brief instant, before realizing the car was full and jumping back in, driving off as if he'd been caught off guard. Once we began moving cautiously, careful not to make my loud exhaust pop, we rounded a corner and saw something straight out of a crime movie. A van and a 4x4 parked with rear doors open. The first car from before now sitting alongside, and around 5 or 6 men moving what looked like small dark bricks. 2 more men stood apart, one holding a baseball bat and the other a long gleaming blade, while the first guy waved a pipe or stick and shouted something toward the others. 2 of them jumped into a car, and I realized they were about to come after us, so I slammed the accelerator and we barely squeezed past a security gate and a Land Rover entering the lot, escaping before we could have been boxed in. Even after we were clear, my heart was racing and my hands were shaking from the adrenaline, and I kept replaying the scene in my head, thinking about how quickly things could have gone south. Every detail, from the shadows between the vehicles to the glint of the blade under the parking lot lights, felt like something straight out of a movie, except terrifyingly real. We debated for hours afterward what exactly we had stumbled upon, convinced it was some sort of illegal exchange, and realized that any delay on our part could have had serious consequences. Nights like this are the kind of thing that make you appreciate how lucky you can get in an instant, and ever since, late-night drives near that parking lot are completely off the table. Even now, months later, I can replay that scene vividly in my head. The headlights, the men, the tension, and the split-second decisions that saved us, and still feel my chest tighten remembering how quickly ordinary nights can turn dangerous. The image of those men, their weapons, and the car blocking our way is something I'll never forget. A couple of days ago, my mom and I went grocery shopping together. I'm 20, and I don't have a license yet, so she drove. The plan was to stock up on supplies because with the pandemic, fewer trips are safer. We arrived at the mall, pulled up near the entrance, and I noticed a couple of men loitering in the parking lot. In our area, it's not unusual to see people hanging around near malls or big supermarkets, and most of the time, they're harmless unless provoked. These guys weren't exactly harmless, though. They worked what's called a protection scheme, asking drivers for money to park safely, or else they might damage the car. My mom had encountered them before, so at first it didn't feel alarming. She parked, and 2 of the men immediately came over to ask for the usual fee. She handed them some cash while chatting, keeping the mood light. That's when I glanced around the lot and froze. Across the far side of the parking area, at least 10 other men were standing around. A couple of them were in some sort of scuffle, and one of them had a knife glinting under the sunlight. My mind went into overdrive. 2 women, a group of men, one holding a knife. It was a scenario I've only ever imagined in horror stories. I could see the panic creeping into my mom's smile too, but she didn't seem to notice the bigger group approaching. Her bright, sunny personality can sometimes blind her to danger, and in situations like this, charm is dangerous. I love her, but I know that being overly friendly with strangers can escalate things quickly. I leaned closer to her and whispered firmly that we needed to leave, keeping my voice calm but serious. You can't show fear in moments like this. It only encourages predators. She hesitated at first, asking if we were really in danger, but when she followed my gaze, she realized the threat. I walked just ahead of her, making eye contact with one of the men while keeping a steady posture that said, "Don't mess with us." I know we were outnumbered, but I've been training in boxing for years, and I wasn't about to let anything happen to her. The man glanced away, clearly understanding that we weren't easy targets. We moved quickly but carefully toward the store, making sure not to draw unnecessary attention. Once inside, I let out a small sigh of relief, though my heart was still racing. My mom tried to lighten the mood, joking about the incident, but I was too keyed up to laugh. We made our way through the aisles, staying close to each other and keeping our senses sharp. Every time we passed a window, I scanned the lot, making sure the group hadn't followed. After finishing our shopping, I suggested a back route to the car. The parking lot was mostly empty by now, and the group of men had stayed near the main entrance, oblivious to us. We carried our groceries quietly, avoiding the lot lights, and finally reached the car without incident. I breathed a little easier once we were inside, doors locked, but the image of that knife flashing in the sun stayed with me. I realized just how easily things could have gone wrong if I hadn't been watching, and I promised myself I'd never leave without something to defend us again. Even now, thinking about those moments makes my pulse quicken. I still can't wrap my head around how many people were there, quietly waiting, unnoticed by most shoppers. It was a dangerous situation that could have ended badly, and I'm grateful we both made it out safely. That day reminded me that being alert and trusting your instincts isn't paranoia, it's survival.